Welcome to Writers Read. And Paul, we start with your poem for sure. Here we go. I say a line, you say a line. Right, right, right.
Right, right, right.
Until you get it right.
Until you get it right.
Then read aloud.
Then read aloud.
You'll draw a crowd.
You'll draw a crowd.
And bring them great delight.
And bring them great delight.
And now we have to welcome two readers, two writers. And the first one is my friend Nancy Bardeen. And I love welcoming Nancy because she's in one of the clubs in Horizon House called the Nancy Club. I think, whatever, there are 16 members now.
Something like that, yes.
Well, welcome, welcome. And
thank you.
I wrote both of our readers an email earlier this week and invited them to share a favorite writer that they enjoy reading. And so, Nancy, who have you thought of? Why?
Well, I thought of David Sedaris because I just really enjoy his zany, his
nice
non sequiturs and his juxtapositions and his, especially his. I've never read any of his books, and I've never seen him on stage.
Okay.
He was here in January on stage in Seattle, but we didn't see that. Yeah, it's an alchemy that really works, and I especially love his descriptions of his family and his, I think he had 5 siblings, and they were all very lively children. And his alcoholic mother, understandably, he portrayed her in such loving but funny ways.
Oh my.
I can remember one that I read a long time ago, and I never forgot it. He was cutting up in school, and he was making such a mess at school. The teacher lost her temper, and she said, "I'm going home to talk to your mother." So she arrived at the door, and David's mother opened the door, and she looked at the teacher, and she said, "You look like I need a drink." And I never forgot that line. It stayed in my mind. Anybody who's had children, that really connects.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Nancy. That's a good. I will seek out David Sedaris a little bit more.
Yeah, he's in the New Yorker.
Yeah, very, very
David
much so. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now, let's hear what you're reading today.
Okay. Well, I'll explain it here. I did. This is a little different. This is for all the residents of Horizon House who are comic superheroes fans. I think they haven't been served yet by Writers Read, so I'm here to remedy that.
Wonderful, Nancy.
Okay. And I wrote a little introduction to how this got perpetrated.
Okay.
Okay. One dark November evening in 2016, I received a mysterious email. "Are you the daughter of Frank Thomas? And if so, would you have a picture of him? And could you answer a few questions?" My father had been dead for almost half a century. Aside from occasional references in books and comics history, and memoir material I had written for the family to go along with albums of his work, it seemed he had been largely forgotten. What I didn't know that night was that Frank Thomas had been rediscovered, that over 800 pages of his work was being archived in the Digital History of Comics Museum, that they were looking for biographical material, and that he still had fans. One of them was my mysterious emailer, Michael Gilbert, who ran a column in a golden age of comics fanzine, Alter Ego. Michael met my response to his query with such enthusiastic insistence that I ended up sending him not only the album pages of my father's early golden age of comics period, with The Eye, Chuck Hardy and the Land Beneath the Sea, Solar Man, and The Owl, but also pages covering his subsequent work in newspaper features, ghosting, advertising, and especially children's comics. All work that he had done in the remainder of his brief life. Alter Ego's editor proposed turning it all into a cover story, with Michael's running account of the progress of the comics industry accompanying the material I was submitting. And it was then I realized I was being provided not only the opportunity to give some well-deserved credit to my father, but also a chance to explain the difficulties he had faced, as well as revealing aspects of his personality and beliefs to a receptive readership. The story ran in February 2019. I began it with the answer to one of Michael's very first questions. Yes, I remember my father very well. I was born a month after Pearl Harbor and have only a couple of memories of the war. My father's golden age comics period was over with the war. He commuted to the city from our rented house a block and a half from the Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn. He had top secret clearance and worked as a draftsman, something for the Air Force. He was a wonderful father. Every payday, he stopped by a Woolworth's and bought some little piece of furniture for my shoebox dollhouse. I'd be jumping up and down, of course, as soon as he came through the front door. And he'd start searching through all his pockets for what he'd brought for me. Couldn't find it. Oh no, he'd lost it. I was going crazy. One pocket after another. He wore suits and vests and a hat in those days, lots of pockets. Finally, he produced the item. After he hung up the hat, etc., he settled down in his chair to read the Telegram newspaper with me in his lap to keep me out of my mother's hair while she cooked dinner. That's how I learned to read before I went to school. Good thing, the schools were very bad in that neighborhood at that time. When I started first grade there, I was getting picked on big time. So Dad tried to teach me to box. How you tuck your thumb inside your fist so it doesn't get injured when you jab. How to hold your arms. Look for an opening. I can still hear my mother's reproachful voice from the kitchen doorway. Frank, she's a girl. Dad had graduated from a very tough high school in Erie, Pennsylvania. He wasn't the place's standard issue of big and tough. And he had an artist's hands, and worst of all, he liked to draw. So he joined the Golden Gloves and learned to box. He was a huge fight fan all his life. Now I'm going to a digression. You'll have to excuse me because my copy is interspersed with the comics.
Wow, wonderful.
So here's a digression on Frank and boxing. For a skinny guy who liked art, trying to navigate a tough Erie high school, perhaps boxing's initial attraction had something to do with building courage. But while raw display of physical toughness and legged athleticism held appeal, the latter also connected to appreciating the human body as art. His personal style was neither rough nor belligerent. I think that, lacking social, financial, and educational advantages himself, Frank admired the fairness of a sport in which opponents were matched in weight and given the freedom to be fairly judged on endurance, courage, and cunning earned by diligent training of natural ability. In addition, the issue of fairness and freedom had special resonance in a racially segregated America. Dad's regular sparring partner in the Erie gym was African American. They were friends. Dad told the story of how one day, after a session, they concluded they both needed haircuts and headed off from the gym to get haircuts together. They were refused by both their white and black barbers. I think Dad held this up as a sort of metaphor for the tragedy of racism in America. Dad was never a racist. I can remember him one evening at the dinner table heatedly denouncing what we did at Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a racist act. Quote, "We never would have dropped an atomic bomb on Europeans, but we did on Japanese." And I also remember the night Floyd Patterson beat Ingemar Johansson for the world heavyweight title because Dad was so jubilant that the one he felt was the better fighter had won. I regret Dad couldn't know about President Obama.
Oh my.
Now back to where, sorry folks, this is
No problem.
page 7. We're back in Brooklyn now. Dad was a very good photographer in those days. New York was a city of construction marvels, buildings and bridges, and he would go out taking pictures and develop them in a closet off the kitchen that he turned into a little dark room. He had an artist's eye for composition and texture. I still have some framed 8x10 black and white prints he did, just as sharp as the day they dried, and I also have one of his old Leicas. When I turned 7, the landlord arrived one evening and told my parents he was selling the house. We could buy it or leave. We had no money to buy it, and we were suddenly homeless. Dad had been homeless before. When his father lost everything in the Depression, his family was suddenly very poor. That's when he left home and came to New York. Leaving home. The 3 children of Claude, Edward, and Estella Davis Thomas were born roughly 10 years apart. The 3 succeeding decades in which they came of age were in our country's history vastly different ones culturally and economically. Recently published sociological research has explored the idea that the prosperity, or lack thereof, of a period in which people come of age bears lifelong influence on their eventual educational and economic attainments. The level of initial opportunity that the national economic climate affords correlates positively with the eventual parameters of an individual's material success. This provides an interesting framework with which to ponder the life trajectories of my father and his 2 siblings. The eldest, Anna Lucille, embarked on a relatively secure and prosperous path, having completed her nursing degree in the good years of the 20s and married a physician. Clinton, the youngest, while having the dubious fortune of graduating from high school into the Pacific Theater of World War II, nevertheless emerged from service entitled to the benefits of the GI Bill. With intelligence, determination, and hard work, he took full advantage of this opportunity to leverage a formal education into lifetime educational associations that afforded stimulating friendships, worldwide travel, and the satisfaction of a long life of academic service. At this writing, Uncle Clinton is in his 90s and still going strong. Franklin, my father, the middle child, was also in possession of a fine intelligence and will to succeed. But for him, emerging adulthood was filtered through the demoralizing years of the Depression, when his father became embroiled in a partner's bankruptcy. The family was forced to give up a comfortable Union City, Pennsylvania home, a summer cottage on Lake Chautauqua, and violin lessons for Frank, to start over again from scratch, excuse me, in a farmhouse with neither electricity nor running water on a forlorn country crossroad called Tillotson Corners. On his deathbed 30 years later, my father confided he was proud that he had stayed there long enough to help provide his mother with an indoor bathroom. But then he left with little more than the shirt on his back to pursue his dream in New York City. One sunny afternoon, 2 decades later, while we were waiting for my mother to finish researching some art history in the 42nd Street Library in Manhattan, Dad led me outside to a shady back corner of Bryant Park and pointed to a bench. "That's where I slept my first week in New York," he said. "There was a Salvation Army soup kitchen a few blocks down where I ate once a day. I slept under newspapers." Then he looked at me with fierce earnestness and added, "If you are ever cold, remember, newspapers can keep you warm." I was stunned by his total seriousness. Survival advice to his child from a man so scarred by the Depression that he, even in better times, would not feel entirely secure that it couldn't happen to us again. Back to page 9. Arriving in New York with neither money nor friends, he needed a steady job and found one in a department store as a department store window trimmer. Thinking maybe commercial art was a possible career path, he signed up for a course at the Trapphagen School of Design in Manhattan. As Dad told the story years later, the art teacher there took one look at his attempt at drawing high fashion and quite flatly suggested he stick to cartooning. But Trapphagen wasn't entirely wasted. It was there he met Miss Jerry Peterson. The wedding story. The task of choosing a church was a delicate one. Frank had a personal distaste for all organized religion. Jerry was a lapsed Roman Catholic with a much more observant mother and sister out in Colorado to answer to. New York's Marble Collegiate Church seemed best to serve, its theological blandness tolerable to Frank, and its socially prominent status a consolation to Jerry's family. Plus, it was close to their jobs. With only a weekend for a ceremony and honeymoon, they arrived with their 2 best friends at the church in a great hurry early on a Friday afternoon, and finding a young man sitting in an office, inquired if there was anyone there who could marry them. The young man said, excuse me, if they waited until he finished his sandwich, he would marry them. They did, and he did. Thus, they unwittingly emerged with a wedding certificate signed by a young clergyman who later became one of the most prominent Protestant ministers of the mid-20th century, Marble Collegian's Reverend Dr. Norman Vincent Peale.
Oh, wow.
We liked to joke in later years that they could pass the document off as evidence of a big New York society wedding. To page 12. Excuse me.
Oh, this is wonderful, Nancy.
Oh, here we go. Finally, the golden age of comics. Franklin had arrived in New York a skinny farm boy armed with drive-in dreams and only a high school education, in which, according to his brother Clinton's memoir, he had shown very little interest. But during those few years until the arrival of the war, Franklin became Frank, as he metamorphosed into an increasingly self-assured comic artist, finding a serendipitous fit with a publishing period that was later known as the Golden Age of comics. During this period, he first shows the fertile imagination combined with tremendous capacity for technical improvement that would characterize his work for the rest of his brief life. Examining his work, we can trace a progression. The crudely executed panels of Dr. Hypno and Solar Man smooth out into the more flowing energy of the owl. Hard-edged cops and robbers give way to the innocent warmth of Billy and Bonnie B. Dinky Doyle and other funny stuff. The end of the war brought Frank's release from the daily commute from our little rented house in Brooklyn and great hope of returning to cartooning with the character of Dinky Doyle. Dad had been burning the proverbial midnight oil developing Dinky after all those long days at our Manhattan drafting table. And he came close to success with the feature, but in the end, Dinky was never syndicated. I don't know for sure why, but I wonder if Dinky was too much a character of the Depression. He was a lovable, spunky underdog and a victim of squalid circumstances. Yet victorious post-war Americans were no longer Depression underdogs, and when the post-war economy began to take off in response to pent-up domestic consumer demand and the material needs of a war-devastated world, Americans were eager to forget squalid Depression circumstances in a tidal wave of post-war prosperity. Irresistibly human as a character and involved in absorbing adventures, Dinky, nevertheless, may no longer have fit the times. Many years later, Dinky underwent a reincarnation as a little cowboy, Hossface Hank. The feature was syndicated and ran for many years in weekly newspapers in both the U.S. and several foreign countries. There was still a post-war housing shortage when we had to leave our rented house in Brooklyn. Even if we could have afforded to buy it, the grimy Brooklyn waterfront provided neither safe streets nor an acceptable public school now that I was in second grade. Dad was determined to continue a career in cartooning. Mrs. Bergen, his former landlady in Queens, offered to share her home if Dad would handle man-of-the-house chores and Mom would cook dinners that would include her as family. There would be a short walk for me along safer, leafy streets to a much better public school. When my brother, John, brain damaged at birth, was accepted at Willowbrook State School, we left Brooklyn. An upstairs bedroom in Mrs. Bergen's big turn-of-the-century house became Frank's studio. For 2 decades after the war, Frank honed his skills with a variety of work, writing Dell comics for children, producing comic illustrations for advertising accounts, creating Hossface Hank, and Auntie and Arabella for Cats magazine, and from the close of the 50s, in order to pay the mortgage on our home in Connecticut, Ghosting Ferdinand, originally created by the great Danish artist Henning Dahl Nicholson. But all this time, Frank was working to create a comic of his own that could achieve national daily syndication, and after shopping several ideas without success, he finally gained attention with the single-panel pantomime antics of his little artist character, Artie. Artie provided a versatile platform for different settings and time, place, history. It was not locked into any particular social or national framework. And with Artie, Dad showed he had developed the secret of the best cartoonists, which is to simplify, to identify the kernel of the gag, and to eliminate everything else in the way, including language. But Artie never achieved syndication. After a long and painful struggle with cancer, Frank died in 1968 at the age of 54, and Artie died with him. Afterwards, I'm almost finished. Don't give up hope. The loss of many family members in the 1960s seemed to mark an end. Clinton, the last of his generation, remained abroad until he retired. Several decades passed, and younger family members were busy with careers and children. But as is often the case, enough time passed that old ideas became new. Action superhero comics were rediscovered. Comics as an artistic medium lost their disreputable reputation with the birth of the graphic novel. Film joined in to celebrate the return of superheroes in bursts of digital special on-screen effects in blockbuster movies. Comics became a serious subject of study in college literature and cultural history courses. All this was accompanied by the ubiquitous rise of the personal computer, which allowed family members to easily communicate and reconnect. In addition, personal computers increasingly offered the history of and information about any subject to any person with computer skills and curiosity. And that described Clinton Thomas. He gets the credit for discovering Frank's work alive and well again on the World Wide Web, in a sort of science fiction version of dying and enjoying eternal life in cyberspace. Wikipedia, blogs, fanzines make it happen in the world of comics. What fun to explore websites and suddenly discover Frank's work, which can still give pleasure.
Oh my, Nancy, I feel I know Frank and I know you now. What a good story, and what
Thank you for
beautiful
listening.
writing. You see, your writing
Thank you for listening.
took us into Frank's life. Thank you so much. And
You're very
Ari.
welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay, Sam, here we are again for a good read from your writing. And would you please share your favorite writer with us, or writers, plural, because you have been in the world of the written word for so long that you must have many.
Well, the other day I had read a piece in the New York Times book review about Sinclair Lewis.
Yes.
And that whetted my appetite to come down to our library and get a copy of Babbitt. And that was an utter failure because there are no Sinclair Lewis books in our library.
Well, now we need to make a note of that, don't we?
And I panicked, and then I went over to look at my favorite of favorites, which is John Steinbeck,
Okay.
and we had no Steinbeck. So I'm going to have to donate some Steinbeck
You're gonna
books
have
down
to.
there. Two of our great writers, yeah. I love both of those writers, but many others too.
Yes, well, thank you very much
Sure.
for tossing those names in the mix.
I have two pieces. The first one is very short, and it was written initially to our 4 children for the benefit of their children, and it got circulated to other grandparents of our vintage, and so I decided instead of just keeping it personal, I would share it today.
Good, thank you.
This has to do from an experience that my wife and I had just before Christmas when we took 3 of our grandchildren to see West Side Story. As we sat next to our grandchildren at the brutal ending of the new movie West Side Story, I thought about the hard world our wonderful grandchildren are going into. And it brought to mind the words of love and wisdom of Atticus Finch, who says to his children in another brilliant film, To Kill a Mockingbird. About midway through, the villain, Bob Ewell, has menaced Jem and Scout Finch, waiting in their car while their attorney father is inside the Robinson shack, telling Mrs. Robinson he will defend her husband Tom, falsely accused of raping Ewell's daughter. Ewell, peering through the car windows, has scared the kids. Jem, 12, tells a black boy to go inside and get his dad. Atticus comes out. Ewell calls him a nigger lover. Atticus stares him down and drives his kids home. As he steps onto their front porch, holding sleepy 6-year-old Scout in his arms, he stops and says to Jem, "There's a lot of ugly things in this world, son. I wish I could keep 'em away from you." He pauses. That's never possible. So I thought of all our grandchildren, Tommy, who's already in the world, Valerie, who is about to enter, and the rest, Tony, Jack, Grace, Sam, Andrew, Charlotte, Nico, and little Thomas. It's true, we can't protect these wonderful kids from the world's ugliness. To try would be to cheat them, to disarm them. But we can teach them the goodness in people, to respect others, those who are different, even the ones we don't like. Not bad behaviors, but respect for all people and not to see them as other. That is how we help to arm them for the hard aspects of the world in which they will find their places. Steven Spielberg's West Side Story is a brilliant movie with great music, dancing, dialogue, actors. It is also a blunt metaphor for the evils of hatred, for the harms and hurts that come from acting on that hatred by seeking revenge. The fight scene and, at the end, the shooting of Tony in the back are hard, real, and in your face. Jack, Grace, and Sam will be okay. They're strong, well-grounded young people, but I wish they had been a bit older before witnessing this, the ugly, dark side of our world. Thanks for listening. I hope this is a bit more than the mere rumblings of an old man.
Oh, thank you, Sam. What I'm hoping is that you will share a hard copy of this for our 3-ring binder on the windowsill collection.
Sure.
Would that be all right?
Yes, of course, yes.
Because I think people will read this. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
well, I'm
Thank you.
flattered that you'd like it.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. This next piece is a revision of a work that's in progress, and this is very early in the story, and I have reworked it into something that I'm now risking sharing with you all. This is part 1, later on. November the 17th, 1983. The small gathering at the Applegate estate that afternoon was about more than Penn's 43rd birthday. Management consultant Gail O'Leary would be there to make a major announcement, a clue to which was indicated by the presence of Oscar Winston, artistic director of the Seattle Repertory Theater. But Gail was not there yet, so the 4, Penn Applegate, C. Ling Wei, Tom Jackson, and Oscar, gathered in the spacious parlor, drinks in hand, stood chatting by the large fireplace as a warming robust fire offered warmth and a friendly contrast to the stormy wind and rain outside. The parlor faced east, looking out over a wide veranda, then across a terraced yard with 200 feet of frontage on Lake Washington. There was very little daylight, as the rain clouds blocked out an autumn sun that was about to set. Suddenly, Penn's German shepherd Samson issued a loud bark and bolted from his place by the hearth and dashed over to the French doors. Growling loudly, Samson peered intently out toward the gazebo. Startled, the company rushed over to see what drew the animal's attention. "Samson, what?" shouted Penn, over to see what drew the animal's attention. "Samson," shouted Penn. They couldn't see what Samson saw, but the stiffened dog, tail up and ready, sensed somehow someone was at the gazebo near the dock at the north end of the yard. "Something's burning out there," declared Tom. Flames erupted on an object hanging from a rafter inside the gazebo. Quickly the flames died out, were lit again, only to be blown out by the strong gusts of wind. Tom opened the door. "Go, Samson, sick 'em." Samson burst out across the yard. The figure tried again to light the hanging object. There was a shriek of pain. Samson had glommed onto a leg, likely a man, given the cursing of a male voice. The dog's loud, angry growls bespoke a battle joined. From the veranda, Tom and Penn jogged warily toward the gazebo. Samson yelped as if being hit. Their eyes now accustomed to the dark, Tom and Penn could make out a person running out over the dock, jumping into a boat, and as they reached the gazebo, the craft sped away into the darkness. Turning to Samson, they saw he was favoring his left hind leg. Despite the low light, they could see blood on the hairs around his mouth. "You're a good dog," Penn said, bending over and hugging Samson. He managed a sympathetic whine and stood on his one right hind leg as Penn held him tight. "Let's get him inside," Tom said. "He may need to see the vet." "Look, Penn," Tom said, pointing to some objects on the deck of the gazebo. There was a good-sized piece of cloth, bloodied, and next to the bench, a squirt bottle and handheld igniter, the kind used for lighting a barbecue. "Let's leave them there. They may have fingerprints." They were soaking wet as they walked back to the house. Si Ling had asked Mrs. Nelson, the housekeeper, to fetch some blankets, which she and Oscar wrapped around Penn and Tom. They set Samson near the fire. When Tom touched his left hind leg, he yelped in pain. "He'll need to see the vet," Tom said, looking at Penn. Penn nodded. "I need a cigarette. We'll better get some dry clothes on." Just then, Mrs. Nelson came in. "Gail's on the phone, Penn. Do you want to take the call?" "Yes." Penn stepped into the front hall where there was a small alcove for the telephone. "Damn it, Gail, you missed the fun." "Penn, I'm running late." "Sorry, but my meeting went way over. I'll be there in about half an hour." Gail had called from the large conference room of the Applegate Acres Anderson LLC, the large law firm founded by Penn's late father. All day she had chaired a meeting of food bank executives and their attorneys, hammering out a new cooperative agreement for the 21 banks in King County. She rang off and headed to the garage across the street from Seattle's Grand Dowager Hotel, the Four Seasons Olympic. She drove out into rush hour traffic, slowed by the foul November weather. Her destination was the Applegate Estate on Lake Washington Boulevard, in the city's venerable Denny Blaine neighborhood. A turn-of-the-century section of Seattle, Denny Blaine situated mansions and homes that ran from the shore of Lake Washington up the hill to a high ridge. Weather permitting, residents and visitors could enjoy stunning views of the lake, look south toward Mount Rainier, and east over the water to the growing east side and beyond to the Cascade Mountains. On a clear day, from the Denny Blaine promontory, one could see all the way north to snow-draped Mount Baker at the Canadian border. Seattle's November weather typically proved to be a poster for its reputation as a gray, wet, windy spot astride Puget Sound. What rarely got noticed was its rather mild winter weather. Heavy snowfall was unusual, or its often magazine-covered summers from July through September that delivered spectacular warm days and lingering twilight as late as 10 p.m. This late afternoon, it was blowing and raining, and unusual for Gail, she was behind schedule. "You're here," declared Ben in decibels that called the small gathering to silence. "Tom, open the champagne." Gail gave her a big hug and said, "Happy birthday, you look great." "That's easy for you to say with a figure like yours," replied Penn saucily. "You don't look a day over 32. You've got the best head of red hair on the coast, and you look like I wish I could." It was all said approvingly and not without purpose. Gail noticed Pen's hair looked as though it had just been washed but not dried, and though Pen liked casual clothes, jeans and a sweatshirt did not seem her style for the occasion. "Oh," Pen said, looking at herself, "we had an incident a while ago, a bit scary." "What?" Gail said with a puzzled look. "Someone snuck up on the dock and hung a big Goldilocks doll in the gazebo and tried to set it on fire. Samson spotted it and barked his head off. Tom let him out and he ran over and got the guy on his leg, tore off some of his pants, bloodied." Tom jumped in. "He must have somehow kicked or hit Sam in the left leg. He got loose and ran out to a boat at the end of the dock. They got away. He dropped a spray bottle filled with kerosene and an igniter. But what troubles me," Tom said, "is the doll, barely singed, had a big red letter, P, with a black line through it, stitched onto the apron." "Of course," declared Gail. "That was meant for Pen. Have you called the police?" Silence. "You guys, get real. Call the cops." Embarrassed silence still. "Okay, I'm calling the cops. Now." Gail went to the phone, thinking to herself, Hank Randall. Because no one was under threat that moment or injured, the officers said they would send a detective the next day to take down a report. She walked back to the group. There was an air of sheepishness for not having called the police. Pen looked at the others. "You can see why I say Gail is always spot on, clear-headed, down to business." There was just enough of a pause to allow for a change of subject and mood. "Tom, would you do the honors?" asked Pen. Pen had asked Tom Jackson to stay for her small party following their afternoon business meeting. An attorney who practiced in her late father's law firm, Tom Jackson had not known Pen well until this past year. He popped the cork on a magnum of Taittinger champagne, a bit of foam poured over the top into the towel he had wrapped around it. "You first, Miss Applegate, but wait for us to propose a toast." "That's you," said Pen. "That's you, Gail," said Pen. Tom filled the glasses. "Pen," Gail said with a big smile, "we know that behind your in-the-face, growling manner, you're the most loving, generous, kind woman despite your best efforts to conceal them. Gail, that's just bullshit, but I love you anyway. Tell them the news." "Well," said Gail, "Penn is going to fund the Evergreen Thespian Fellowship Program over a 5-year period. It will be $1 million each year, but she wants it listed as anonymous. It'll pay for 10 graduating high school seniors to work at the repertory theater during the summers, pursue their studies at a university or community college, and graduate with a degree in some aspect or specialty in live theater. We have a news release going out in the morning." There were hoots and hollers and applause of approval, hugs and kisses. Then Oscar spoke. "We've been planning a program like this for several years now, and thanks to the organizing work Gail has done and Penn's generosity, we will launch it next spring. It will take that long to find a director, detail out the requirements for applicants and the competition for selecting the final 10. We want it to be statewide, so all the high schools, large and small, can participate. I asked Penn to let us name it the Applegate Thespian Fellowship Program," he added. "No, that wouldn't work long-term," Penn chimed in. "This way others can donate so it can eventually develop into a sustaining fund. There's no need for the Applegate name. No one will care about that even before my remains are feeding the daisies." "I don't mean to be rude, Penn, but I've got to rush off to the theater," said Oscar, putting on his coat. "You are fabulous. I thank you for the many kids who will benefit from this program you are starting." Si Ling also said goodbye. That left Gail and Tom with Penn to celebrate a while longer. Tom had spent the afternoon clearing up details of the lawsuit Penn intended to file on behalf of Applegate Enterprises against two large insurance conglomerates. They held joint policies on a California racetrack near Sacramento, owned by her late father, but closed down the year before he died. Tom, acting as both his designated executor and attorney for this particular matter, had leased the property to a small horse racing syndicate based in San Jose. They had come a cropper financially, likely due to mismanagement. A year ago, a fire had ravaged the buildings, including 3 small barn stables at the end of the grandstand. Tom suspected arson. He hired San Francisco investigators Tuck and Smithers to probe the event. Barry Tuck was the former state fire marshal, Edward Smithers, a retired FBI specialist in matters arson for the Northern California district. The insurers also suspected arson. They declined to pay the racing syndicate's claims, who in turn filed for bankruptcy. That put Penn's property at risk of near total loss. However, if it could be proved that the arson was set by or for the syndicate, Tom believed Penn could go after its members' assets under provisions of California's criminal code. For this action, he retained the former Chief Criminal State Deputy Attorney General Pedro Alvarez, well known for his successful arguments before both the California State and United States Supreme Courts. The whole affair angered Penn. Despite her casual, easygoing manner, Penn was a stickler for truth and justice. She felt an obligation to proper stewardship of her parents' estate. Were she to prevail in this matter, it might yield as much of 10, perhaps 12 million. That mattered little to this woman, whose wealth well exceeded 600 million, if not more. Tom said he needed to get moving. He was on a flight to San Francisco. If Penn had any more questions they had not already discussed, she could reach him at the St. Francis Hotel or at Alvarez's office. I'll be back Friday. Let me know if you want me to come by for an in-person report. Can you get Sampson to the vet's tomorrow? Penn nodded yes. He said goodbye to Gail. It was nice to meet you. Penn has told me about your long friendship. He walked out of the parlor, leaving Penn and Gail to themselves. As Tom shut the door, Penn turned to Gail and said, "Now I see what Sally and Nell see in Tom. As much as his brilliance, it's his thoughtful, careful manner in the way he conducts himself. He anticipates so well and communicates just the right information. I trust him implicitly. I think No, I want you to get to know him better." "Penn," Gail sighed, "I'm sure he's very nice. All that you say. When I'm ready to expand my horizon, I will, and you'll be the first to know. Now I'm tired as heck, and I'm going home to a bath and bed." She gave her a hug and kiss on the cheek and left. Penn smiled inwardly. Well done, she thought. For Gail, a management consultant with several clients in the nonprofit sector, it had been a long day. She'd spent 7 hours mediating the final details of the food bank's agreement, topped off by the quiet announcement of Penn's donation. The fellowship's endowment was launched, and Gail was confident other donors would follow. She should have been pleased, but as she walked out to her car, the incident at the gazebo took over her thoughts. Despite the rain, Gail stood there for a moment before getting into her car. Hank Randall. He's out of prison. He said he would even the score. Got to be him, that bastard. As she drove away, felt exhausted, the windshield wipers swished annoyingly against the pelting rain. The oncoming car lights made seeing the road difficult. As she headed up toward her apartment on Capitol Hill, she let out a long sigh. A nice hot bath is just what I need.
Oh, bravo, bravo. You perked me, Sam. I need to read the book. How close to being done are you?
Oh, I have no idea.
I have no idea. Yeah, of course.
All of the elements of the story are in this chapter.
Oh, I sense that, yeah.
This is essentially the foundation. And there are two of the people in the book that I have to get to know better.
Yeah,
So I'll work on that, but
oh, Sam,
anyway, it'll be a while.
stay the course.
Yeah, well,
Stay
thank
the
you.
course. Thank you, Sam. And tune in again for Writers Read. Good time.